Hey everybody, so today I thought I'd make a video about something that I get asked a lot about in my streams, and that is how to create a Node.js project and the best way to sort of create that project in the form of managing your files. So I thought I'd create a quick video on how to do it using Koa instead of Express and MongoDB as well, and the project's using Node version 8.6. So I hope you liked the video. It was something that I struggled a lot when I first started doing Node.js app development. So I hope it gives some insight. If you like this video, feel free to give a like, and if you want to subscribe, there's going to be more content coming over the next few weeks and months. So I hope this video is helpful for you, and yeah, here it is. So what we want to do to set up our new project is, as you can see, I've created a new directory called new node. So first of all, we're going to initialize it as a node package. So this is just giving us the boilerplate. For the things that we want. I'm just going to fill it out with the username. This is all pretty standard stuff. And inside you'll see we have just package.json. Again, just here. So this is what we can use to start installing things. So first of all, we're going to try and install Koa. So we want Koa, and maybe Koa router as well. So these should install nicely. So as well as Koa and Koa router, we probably want to install Mongoose if you guys are using MongoDB, which was probably what we'll be using for most of our apps. But you can really use anything. So make sure we put save on these, and we'll add the save to the other two. Make sure we put save. Basically, putting save will write it to your npm or your package.json. And we probably want a body parser. And is there anything else we want in the meantime? Probably Morgan. Morgan is a logger. So these are the main packages we want to set up. Now, we set index.js as our main file, so let's add index.js, and there we go, we got index.js. So now we got index.js, package.json, and package.js, and the node modules folder. So the node modules folder is basically where all our installed node stuff is kept from npm. So our index.js, basically, we're not going to have much code in here, it's just going to call the stuff. So I usually create a source folder. This is where all the source files are kept. So let's say we do const app equals require app.start. And that's usually how I like to structure the beginning of my projects. So now we need the actual app. So if we create app and index.js, you'll see here in our source, we've got source app index.js, which is a blank file at the moment. So in here, let's do, now remember we were calling start in our index, our main package, so we want to have a start method here. So we can do export.start equals, and this will be an async function. So this will allow us to start our app. So technically this code should now work. Now to run it, I we'll do node path equals source, and then we'll just do npm start npm. So okay, our start is not working, so we need to do start, and it would just be node index.js. So we need to add this in so we can start it. And there we go. So it just runs and nothing happens, which is great. So now the next things we probably want to do is we want to connect to a database. Now this is quite important. So again, in our source, we'll make a directory called database. And again, in here, we're using index.js. And we probably want a method here called connect. So exports.connect equals. Now this is going to be the main method that we're going to use to connect to our database. If we look in here, we can do, so first of all, we require it. Now you'll notice I don't do source/database. And the reason I don't do that is because of this node path that we put in front. So the node path itself allows us to set that our node path is going to be the source, so it just looks from there, which is a really nice little feature. Now we can add it into our start, and it should give us the same thing. Yeah, so there's no errors for connecting here. So connect, again, we want to make this an async function using ES6 so that it tells us that it's returning a promise. And we want our app to connect to it. So again, nothing is really happening. If we run node start, it works. So to make this easier, I'm going to call a nice service called NodeMon, which will basically allow us to, first of all, install it. So install NodeMon globally first. So NodeMon is a really nice utility that will allow you to basically, it will restart your app every time a file changes, which is great for us. So it allows us to basically, instead of keep having to type in npm start, we can just do this. Now the problem with NodeMon is you'll see that here it doesn't seem to work. So you need to do the node path for NodeMon each time. There we go. So here it's now running, and it's telling us that it had a clean exit, and it's just waiting for changes before it restarts. So if we save this file, again, run straight through. So the next thing we want to do is we want to connect to a database. Now, hopefully you've got Mongo running locally. If not, then I recommend installing it via npm install or brew install if you're on Mac, or apt-get if you're on Linux. So the next thing we're going to try and set up is our installation. Now, before we can do that, we need to have some sort of configuration. And this is basically going to be an area where we store all the configuration for our app. Now in Node, there's two ways we can store configurations. So we use like a hybrid of both. So again, let's create our index.js and open this up. Close this down. Now we want to basically have a configuration file for default configurations. So we'll first require this before we actually create it. And we'll export a function called get, which will basically return one of two things. So there we go. So this will basically either return an environment variable set by the process. An example of one is node path. So we ask for node path, it will return source. And if that doesn't exist, using the double or indicator, it will return us something in the config. So now we need to create a config.json. And we'll create it in the source. And this will basically have all of the configurations that we'll have set by default. So in this case, we're going to want a database name, and we'll call this new node, and we'll probably want a URL. And in this case, it's going to be localhost. So now, in our app, especially in the database, we can start to create our code to connect. So first of all, we want to import Mongoose. And Mongoose is a nice wrapper around MongoDB, which allows us to create schemas and things like that that must conform to certain types. It allows us just to clean up some of the data. If you're not a fan of Mongoose, there's also Mongodb, which is also great, and that's a little bit less strict on how you use things. It allows you basically to store anything as Mongo was originally intended to do. I prefer Mongoose just because it's a little bit more featureful. So we're requiring Mongoose and we need to connect. So if you'll remember, we created our, well, before we do that, we'll import config. And we'll have to make sure here to do configuration, not config, in our require. Otherwise that will just load up the JSON. I'm also going to set up promises. So Mongoose will return global promises rather than callbacks, everything, which is very useful for when building a Koa app or an ES6. And first of all, we want to just get our Mongo URL from our configuration. And we'll get the database name as well. So we got our connect function, and what we want to do here is return a new promise. As Mongo doesn't have a promise, return a promise for connecting, so we can get rid of the async as we're explicitly returning it. Of resolve and reject. And here we just do our connect code. Great, so this is just a little bit of boilerplate that will allow us to connect to our MongoDB. And it basically monitors the connection. When the connection is open, let's just fix this typo here, it will resolve, and when it's failed, it will reject. So now if we check our app, we can see that we are calling it, but let's do it in await. And then we can do a console.log. Now, we want to wrap this in a try. And the reason for this is because that we're basically wanting to monitor any errors. And here we'll just log our error. So here it tells us that we are connected to the database. We can be a little bit nicer and add it in here, but I think this is fine. So we've connected to our database, and nothing went wrong. Let's make an error just so we see what happens when it goes wrong. So here, now it tells us what goes wrong in that try catch, and it handles gracefully so we can fix it. In this case, as I say, source code error, we just want to make the change, and we don't want to handle that. So now we've got our database, we got our app, we got some configuration loading. So the next thing that I like to do is start looking at our API. Now, if you're building a web app which is going to be serving front end, this will slightly change. Me, I prefer just to build pure JSON APIs, but we'll get started. So let's create a users. So this is going to be the API endpoints for our users. We'll create a directory underneath API. So if we have a look, we've got API/users. And in this, we're going to want three things. We're going to want our model, our controller, and our routes. So these are the three things that go in sort of any public endpoint or things like that. So our model is going to basically store the model of our users. Our routes are going to be what is routing towards our user routes, and the controller is going to be the sort of wrapper that handles all of that. So first of all, let's create our user object. Now we're going to do this in Mongoose using Mongoose schemas. Again, this is a little bit of boilerplate, but it's not too bad. So we're requiring Mongoose. We're also going to require schema from Mongoose. And then we'll create our user schema. And here we'll just put a username. Now we can make this a little bit safer, so we can do type.string and required equals true. And we'll be created on. And we'll do type date default 8. .now. Now we want to add this to our database, so we do mongoose top model, and we'll call it user and add it to the user schema. Now we want to store this, so we can just require this file. So we'll store it as user, and we'll export it as the entire file. So next thing we want to do is we want to create our routes. So here we basically want to require the Koa router, and we'll call it instantly. And then we want to do a get method, so router.get. And we'll do a post, so we can create. Then let's export the routes. So now that we have our routes set up, and this will be for a get and a post at /users eventually, we need some way of handling that. So we'll import our controller that we've not yet created. Now here we need to specify that it's in the same directory. And in our controller, we want to import our model. So model equals require dash model. Now we can change the name of model, and we'll call it user, as that's what it is. So now we need two methods. We need get. Make these two async functions. And we'll have create. So our get is just going to return everything, and our create is going to create one from some data. Now what we want to do here is we want to unwrap a value called data. And the reason we do it like this is it allows us to have name parameters in JavaScript, which is something very useful. That means data should come in. We can also set data to be empty by default. So even if we pass nothing into this function, it will still work. So it's a really nice way of keeping our code safe. So we've got our two methods. Let's call them from our routes. So the first one was controller. I believe it was get. So let's change this to read, as we don't really want to call it get. It's not very RESTful. So controller.read. And in our post, we'll do const user equals await controller dot create. But remember, we need to pass some data in here. So here we can get it out of our context by going const data equals ctx.request dot body. And that will grab us all of our data. So we do create with data. Now for the final thing, we can do const ctx.body equals user. And that will basically return the user in the request or response body. Again, we'll do it here, and this will return the users. So those are our two routes set up. Now we actually have to do something with the routes. So first of all, here we want to do a similar thing. Again, we want to call await. And this will just find all of the users for us. Then we can return these users. And in create, we want to do something similar. We'll just pass the data in. We won't worry too much about validating it. And then we can return user. Now we can actually reduce these down. So we can just do return user.find. And here we can do the same thing. Return user.create data. So now we have our root set up, we have our controller set up, and we have our model set up. So far so good. So the last thing we really need is to do routing. So once we have our routes set up, well, we need our routes set up so that we can actually denote a path for these. So again, we're going to use Koa router for this. Similar to how we have it for our individual routes, and we want to require the users. So here is slightly different. So we're going to do it API / users / routes, and then we'll tell our user to use this. And that'll export the router. Now the last thing we need to do is we need to fill out our app a little bit more. So our app currently connects to the database, but we actually don't do much else than that. We need to set up our Koa instance. So let's import Koa. Let's import our router. And we want our body parser. And we probably want our logger as well. And finally, we probably want response time. So we can see how long it takes for our requests to finish. So in our start, we can do this outside of the start actually. So let's create our app. I'll create a new instance of Koa. Then we'll tell our app to use which middleware we want. So in this case, we probably want the response time. Let's rename that to be a little bit more clear. We want to use our logger and make it a combined logger. We want our body parser. And we want to use our routes. Finally, we'll add some middleware in. This is mainly because I use these to create a JSON API. But this is just setting everything to be JSON in the response. Okay, so we've got an issue where we haven't got Koa response time. So let's go ahead and install that. And we make sure to save it. So everything seems to be fine. So now we're connected to the database. So the last thing we want to do is we just want to listen on our app. So let's do and we'll set it to 3000 for the moment. then let's just log that we've connected. Okay, so everything seems to be there. So let's make sure this is actually working. Now we'll use curl just to get from our users. So we do localhost 3000/users, well, it returns an empty array. So let's see if we can add some data to it. So remember, we needed to add a username. So if we create a post request, we'll set data to, well, let's set it to be JSON as well. Set this to be application data JSON. And we'll pass in a username of hello world. So our post was successful and we managed to create a user. We can take it in our Mongo database. So if we do Mongo, check our Mongo name, new node. So there it is, our user is stored in there. So now we go out and we make the same request again. We see that we return a user. So this is it. There's a few things that one might want to change in this. As a sort of self-challenge, if you can change the port number here for app.listen. Let's set it like this. If you can change that so it's loaded from the configuration file, that's a great start to understanding how this all works. But other than that, that's the basics of how I set up my Koa app projects. It's a really nice way of just keeping it tidy. You build out in here. Let's say if you want to add a new API endpoint, you can have likes and all your API codes there. And if you want to add testing in, you can do the testing next to it. So let's say we've got all our testing code is there, and it just keeps things nice and modular. So I'm going to add a link in the description down below to where you can find this project on GitHub, and you can download it and play with it yourself. So that's it for this episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it helped clarify how you would set up a project. Any other questions or any requests for other videos, please write in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this, please click the like button and subscribe for more daily content. Thank you very much.